Evening and welcome to the regularly scheduled Shelburne Selectboard meeting of Tuesday, January 8, 2019, which I now call to order. The first item is to approve the agenda.
Move to approve.
Jamie moves to approve.
Second.
Josh seconds. Is there any discussion? Any discussion among the public? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The next item is to approve the Select Board meeting minutes of December 18.
So moved.
Moved by Mary,
Second.
seconded by Josh. Lee.
Jamie.
Oh, Jamie.
It's one of those J's.
Oh, geez. Seconded by Jamie. Any discussion? Hearing none. Any discussion in the public? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay.
Abstain.
Colleen abstains for reason of not having been present. The next item are public comments, and I expect we will hear first from Ruth.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Here.
Yeah. Okay, so over there at the site, they have stopped what they call site work, which is moving dirt around because the ground is now frozen. Before they did that, the town hall drainage systems around the perimeter were all completed, so they've been backfilled on top of, and everything's all level and good to go there, and they are functioning. Because we're not digging and the ground is frozen, the soils testing and monitoring is now all on hold. Lee is in close contact with the state as questions arise about that. The cupola has been finished flashing, so we had to take apart the roof around it and flash around it in various places, the seaming to keep it from leaking, and that work has been completed. So they're pretty much done with the cupola at this time. They will come back in the spring and finish cleaning it up and painting it. The same thing for the portico. We put the columns back up. They need some more work that would be done in the spring in warmer temperatures. The brickwork will be replaced, and that will probably be held until the spring, although there's possibility, depending on mason schedules and the weather, that could be done a little earlier. Inside Town Hall is, for the first time in many years, dry. The basement actually is really nice. It doesn't smell like mildew. It's not damp. It's really great. So we're looking forward to being able to improve use of that space. There's a lot of work going on in there. They're doing electrical, plumbing, fire protection, mechanical, and then once they get all that done, then they will finish up the the woodwork and things that were on the kind of the restoration list. So, and then the new construction is continuing. I don't know if you've noticed, they've started putting up the steel. They've put up the major steel framing that holds the whole building together. They're now putting up the studs, which are also steel. Once they get all that put in over the next couple of days, then they'll go ahead and put up the first layer of exterior finish, essentially. It's interior finish, but it will serve as the exterior layer over the winter. And they will put in, they're not the real windows, they're wooden frame outs with plexiglass in them, so that the entire space will be enclosed and they can go ahead and do all of the electrical and the plumbing and the finish out inside over the winter. So that's kind of where we are, and come by and look at it. Just stay out of the way of the fire engines and the bulldozers, right? So, any questions? No? Okay.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks, Ruth.
Are there any other comments from the public? Hearing none, seeing no hands. The next item is Select Board comments. Would you like to start, Josh?
Sure. I'm happy to report that we will have a meet and greet reception for our new town manager on Saturday, January 26th from 2 to 4 in this and combined rooms, and invite everyone to come. There will be refreshments. A lovely group of people have volunteered to help put that together, and I think it would be nice to have a good group of people here to welcome Lee to his new position and ask him any difficult questions you'd like to ask him.
Corrections at
great.
least. Yeah.
Thanks for pulling that together, Josh.
Yeah, Mary?
None that are general in nature. I have lots of specific comments on the rest of our agenda, so we may as well just get to it as far as I'm concerned.
Colleen?
Nope, same as Mary.
None from my end either.
I've got just a brief one, and if I may, speaking on all our behalf as a board, welcome to the new year, to which we look forward. There'll be the usual challenges, probably a surprise or two, but this is a work of great love and dedication, and doing it with all of us not only eases the job, it makes it more successful. So join us this year with questions, opinions, attitudes. We welcome them, and onward. We have a budget discussion tonight, which will take a good bit of time. And I would ask you in advance to recognize that specific questions on any of your parts regarding any specific budget item are more appropriately raised at the time we discuss that item, rather than ahead of time. We will be very busy adjusting the proposed budget as it's being presented, and we will welcome comments throughout, but we'd ask you to hold those off until we get to the item, the specific item in which you have the greatest interest or concern. The next item is Town Manager Report.
Well, as the chair said, a lot of hard work has gone into and will continue to go into work on the budget as we look toward town meeting. Otherwise, just like to thank our dispatchers, police, fire, rescue, and all of our mutual aid partners. We had a major structure fire this afternoon, a barn fire, and it took a lot of work to handle that. And if anyone ever questions why certain fire protection standards exist, we had to lay 4,000 feet of hose today to get from the nearest hydrant to the barn.
Where was it?
So, on, off of Harbor Road.
I can report they're all still there.
Yeah, and there'll be a lot of work afterward because there's a lot of hose to clean. So just recognize that things like that take a lot of work from a lot of volunteers and
And what was the
professionals.
location?
Tom Cabot's property, the barn.
No injuries.
No, none that I'm aware of. But it was, took a lot of work and it's a tricky location.
Thank
We
you.
had a lot of mutual aid partners out there. Thanks.
Thank you. The next item is, are you all set, Lee?
Thank you.
Next item is an executive session, which we will hold pursuant to 1 Vermont Statutes annotated 313 regarding the appointment/employment/evaluation of a public officer employee, and to which we will invite Diana at a point after we've begun. Diana, okay? And Lee. Are there motions to that effect?
Sure, I would move to find that premature public knowledge regarding the appointment, employment, or evaluation of a public officer or employee would place the town at a substantial disadvantage.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Yep.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. Ayes have it.
I would also move to enter executive session pursuant to 1 VSA Section 313 to discuss the appointment, employment, or evaluation of a public officer or employee, and invite the finance director, town clerk, and town manager into the executive session with the town clerk attending shortly after we begin that session.
Yes, and I omitted Peter. You,
No, it's there.
To go.
Oh, but you want him to come back later?
yeah, is that okay, Lee?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Second.
So, okay, with that amendment.
Moved and seconded by Colleen. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? The ayes have it. The next item on the agenda is number 8, the Cbc applicants, of whom we have 4, as well as an applicant for the DRB. Are you the gentleman that's applying for the DRB?
I am.
Mr. Griswold?
Yes.
Would you do this a favor of introducing yourself and talking a little bit about,
Get the microphone?
Yeah.
Yes, either one.
I'm Doug Griswold. I live at 137 Aspen Circle. I've been involved in permitting in one form or another for most of my life. Ran a business that required permits on a regular basis. I enjoy the process, and I enjoy the detail. What else would you like to hear?
Are you familiar with the operations of the DRB?
I am. I actually read most of the regulations of the zoning board, so I'm even.
Wow.
Oh, my
Yeah, well,
goodness.
I can't say I can repeat them, but I did wander through them. I'm very familiar with the process. I don't know how this particular DRB works, but I know how the planning process works, and my reason for applying is I feel that everybody who applies should have a fairly good idea before they go in what the results could be, and the only thing the DRB needs to deal with are things that don't meet the natural zoning requirements of the town and planning. I mean, everything should be pretty easily followed throughout the process.
Have we gotten feedback from the DRB?
Yes, we have
We
Jeff.
have had feedback from the chair who feels good about Mr. Griswold as an applicant.
Did we have someone move into an alternate? Is that how the vacancy came up?
Yes, so Ian McCrae, who has been a full member, has asked to step back to
Okay.
alternate due to personal obligations. And thus, we put out the
Got it.
call for a new member. And Ian is hoping to stay on as an alternate. There is a third slot vacant at this time. So if you appoint Doug to the position, then we would also
Have one more.
appoint Ian to.
What would his term be, Lee?
It would be to fill out Ian's
Next 1 year or
term. I'd have to check that
So
to
it's
see.
the
but it would-
balance
It'd be
of,
the
balance of
balance of it, and then you
and
could
then
reapply.
reappointment.
Right, and then we'd move Ian to alternate.
as resident expert, do you have?
Well, I wholeheartedly endorse Mr. Griswold. I know him both personally and professionally. I know he's very committed to Shelburne, and would, I think, be an asset due to his background, running a construction company for many, many, many years. It is a complicated area. Having sat on the board myself for a number of years, I'm still confused by the process, and so people who are, have a depth of experience, I think would be a real asset. So, I think Doug would be great to work with and would fit well with the other members of the board.
Great. Doug, have you served on any other boards and committees in town?
No, not in town.
You familiar with the conflict of interest ordinance and comfortable with?
Yes, and I would need to review it very carefully because one of the problems with a small town is you know almost everybody.
Right.
So I need to,
It's an important,
know
One
how
for this
that
board.
should be dealt with when a personal friend comes up or somebody you know comes up before the board, which
Good.
I review with someone of the town attorney or whoever. There must be a written piece I can go through.
good.
And
Thank
do you have any familiarity with on-the-record review or
Yes.
work with that? Okay.
And I've also read all the minutes and started going through the videos, but they were longer than I thought.
Didn't have enough popcorn.
Or
Have
beer?
you got any questions for us, Doug?
No. But if appointed, when would I start?
Immediately.
Right away.
Yeah.
Tomorrow? No, they don't meet
Before you
tomorrow.
get home, you can, if you're willing to help, you can sit here and work with budget with us, but that would be asking much too much.
I can hang in there.
Is there a motion?
I would like to move to appoint Mr. Griswold as a member of our town DRB.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I'm going to assume Lee will supply the
Yes,
term,
The term.
the term
Yes.
at a future point. Is there-
Forever. Thank you.
Is there any discussion?
Yeah.
Hearing none, those favoring the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Congratulations and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and for applying.
Do we need a similar motion to then appoint Ian McCray to the alternate position?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Jamie.
Everybody.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it,
Thank
and
you.
so do you.
Thank you. Just making sure.
The next set of applicants, and we're so very, very fortunate to have a multiple, 4, have applied as for student positions on the Parks and Rec Committee. Do you want to introduce that, Lee?
Well, yes, we have that wonderful and unique opportunity before us. There are no student members at this time, is that correct? And we now suddenly have 4 applicants for positions. Typically, 2 students on a board have been a traditional number, although there's no strict limit or requirement. I'm hoping we can find a way to accommodate all of them, whether as sitting members, alternates, or some other approach, since they've all expressed great interest in helping out at Parks and Rec, and several of them have been active volunteers and participants, as I understand it, so none of them are new to the committee.
There's only 1 spot, correct?
It's really up
Many as
to
2.
your discretion. Typical number is 2, because if nothing else, it gives students a peer
Yeah.
to be on a board with.
And there's
Be more
4
comfortable.
applicants?
And more,
We have 4.
but there's no restriction
No.
on having 2.
No.
No,
Peggy, I know you're here.
Peggy's here.
Would you like to introduce the 4?
Nancy's here.
Okay, well, we've got Garrett Brunley
Raise your hand when you,
and Mia Rumstead, Jackson Conowitz, and Jackson Thompson.
Would each of you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in the committee, beginning with you, Garrett?
Sure. My name is Garrett Grunling. I'm a junior at CVU. I worked with Peggy over the summer as a lifeguard, and I've also been an active member of the town with Boy Scouts. I've been a part of Boy Scouts for 6 years, and I just gained my Eagle Scout, and I actually worked a little with Lee, Peggy, and Betsy, and Joe Colangelo on my Eagle Scout project. So I had some interaction with like town logistics on building my project, and I feel like I worked with a town at the beach, and I enjoyed it, and I feel like being able to help my town in a different way would be a cool experience.
Nice.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett.
I have a question. What was your Eagle Scout project?
I built beaches for the town beach. Benches, I mean, like game tables.
Thank you.
Very cool.
And I didn't know until it was pointed out, but I was really happy to see you at the holiday celebration. You made a terrific elf.
Indeed. Yes, indeed.
I wouldn't want you to go through life with the reputation of having been a good elf, but you were really something there. I mean, you made the occasion even happier, so congratulations on that. Mia, do you want to?
Hi, I'm Mia Brumstead. I'm also a junior at CVU. I'm interested in the committee, I guess mostly based on my involvement in Shelburne's recreation activities. I've played lacrosse through the rec department from like K through 8th grade, same with soccer, K through 6th grade, and it's always just been a big part of my life being a resident of Shelburne. I also am certified to ref youth lacrosse, so I did that last year, refed a number of games here, and I think that my experience working with youth would be give a valuable input into the committee in various youth programs that Shelburne kind of administers, and I think that also my general interest in government just, I guess, even on the local level is what's really also been a big contributing factor to my interest in joining the committee. I guess based on my social involvements at school, I'm a part of the Student Justice Committee as well as the Student Council. This is my third year on the council. For the last 2 years, I was elected as a student representative, and this year I'm serving as a rep on the Curriculum Clearinghouse Board, and then reporting back to Student Council. And that board was basically like a group of adults from the school and who, review the curriculum and clear classes. And I'm now a part of that discussion, which I think I just bring that up because I shows my ability to work with adults and my communication skills. So I guess just having said that, those are a few reasons why I'd like to continue that on the committee. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jackson, you want to?
My name is Jackson Conowitz. I am also a junior at CVU. I've been involved in the rec department since kindergarten. I've played basketball, baseball, soccer, lacrosse, name of sport. I've played it. I played it all throughout all up to 8th grade. Played it all through Shelburne School. Played it into CVU. So I feel like it's really been a shaping part of my life, my early life at least, to be part of this department. And recently, I've been doing a lot of refereeing work. Starting probably 5 years ago, 5 or 4, I did basketball, starting as clockwork with getting paid with Dunkin' Donuts gift cards. And recently, been doing legitimate refereeing with basketball and soccer, and then umpiring for baseball. I've really built a lot of connections with a lot of the kids since they play multiple sports typically. So I really feel like it's in my personal interest to do what's best for them, because otherwise you don't want little kids to not like you, right? So I feel like being on this committee would help me better their experiences in the Parks and Rec, along with the the social events that happen that obviously influence their childhoods. I remember going to the tree lighting every year. It was obviously a big part for me. So I just want to make life better for them, make them have the best childhood possible, I guess. So thank you.
Thank you, Jackson. And Jackson, would you like to?
I'm the other Jackson Townsend. I currently go to school as a junior at Vermont Commons. A few reasons why I'd like to join the committee is that it's been a part of my life for pretty much since I could remember. Pretty much, I'd say as soon as I could, I joined the recreational soccer and basketball and pretty much baseball, anything that you could do with them. I had a great time. It's helped inspire a love of helping other kids, having the same pretty much experience that I did. Like, for example, last summer I went to the Dominican Republic for 2 weeks and I helped kids learn baseball. I played with like local villages and I built a field for them. And I believe it was in 8th grade, I did some help with my old coach in hockey, Dan McFall. I helped little kids learn how to skate and play hockey, stuff like that. I just really enjoy being able to help other kids, be able to help other kids have the exact same experience that I had when I was growing up.
Thank you, Jackson. Where in the Dominican Republic were you?
Boca Chica, I think. I believe that's where we were, but we were all over. We were traveling from village to village, playing, having fun.
Good for you. Good for you. Any questions on anybody's part?
Jackson, I want to know, was it probably the case that the kids in the Dominican were pretty good baseball players?
I could not hit a single ball off him. There's this 10-year-old who struck out our entire team twice over.
So yeah.
Yeah, they know the game there.
Can I propose that we take these applicants under advisement, and is it possible to talk about them outside the public setting so we can have some discourse that's free and open, like an applicant for
I think we
job?
can. What I was going to propose, we have a wealth, obviously, whether it does, and I think it's deserving because of the program. It's a great credit to Betsy and Peggy. I thought we might discuss the idea of appointing two and two as alternates.
Yeah, but these are non-voting members, right?
Yes.
No,
So,
I'm
Yes, they're
sorry.
non-voting.
Yes,
yes, they're
not
non-voting members. So the question of whether someone's an alternate or, does it,
I think we'd leave to the committee its sense of how best to use the talent. And the additional proviso would be that we are always interested in the help of student members of committees. So should it be that as an alternate, you spy an opportunity that's even more exciting and important to you on another town committee, we'd be very happy to have you back. So it should go without saying, but we are constantly on the hunt for students who have the interest, and you obviously are all very well qualified, and we'd be very pleased if there were other opportunities that we could offer you.
Peggy,
I offer that as
Does
a,
anyone want to reconsider and think about Bike Path Committee or the Planning Commission? We have our chair here. We have a number of chairs here tonight of other committees. So before we make the call, just putting it out there, if there are any other committees that folks are interested in, but we can.
Peggy,
Can we get their feedback?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Josh, I was going, yeah, same thing. I
I
think.
mean,
Peggy?
Can you imagine? Can you
And Betsy.
manage 4 extra members?
Is there enough room in the?
Right.
Yeah.
well, I'm going to propose that we nominate Mia and Garrett, and as alternates, Jackson and Jackson, and repeat that it would be in the town's interest, and the town would be very, very pleased to have either of your help, Jackson, in another committee, in another role, should you be interested. And other than that, we would defer to the committee itself, to Peggy and her members, as to what the best use and how to manage numbers of chairs and so on and so forth. We're very, very, very fortunate to attract the interest of all 4 of you. Wish that we're more members, more full members that just aren't. So
I guess there's a possibility of then, them serving for 1 year and then switching.
Yeah.
The roles.
Please give that consideration, and if you've been voted an alternate and not a full, please keep in mind that it's with the idea that we want to keep you in the town, active in committees, and we'd love to see you back with another interest should you develop one. Betsy?
Can I speak for a moment?
Sure.
I just want to thank all of them for applying. I know it took a lot of guts to do this, and they all came to a meeting and spoke with us at a meeting, and every single one of them at that meeting had a lot to offer, even after we moved on, just like hearing about them and so forth, and we were discussing our regular business, and new ideas came up, and it was really exciting for us to have them involved. I've known most of them since grade school, and we've worked with them in a variety of ways, whether it's on a team or as a volunteer or at an event or at the beach. So I've gotten to know a lot of them really well, and these are outstanding young people who are going to do really awesome things. And no matter who ends up on the committee, I just want to say you're always invited to a meeting. You're always welcome to come help with events, as many of you have already been doing, not as a member. And we'd encourage you to continue doing that, because down the road, I know it's important to have that kind of experience on resumes or whatever going forward. And whether you're an official member or not, that still counts, and it's still I think, a good thing to have. So I just want to say thank you to them.
Thank you.
I Jerry, you might have a good reason for arguing against this, but I don't see a reason why not just to appoint all four. When we started this, it was to encourage youth involvement, and there's
have a
youth involvement.
tremendous response here. It takes a lot of courage. So
Sure,
you guys
absolutely.
should be commended
I'm fine
for
with
that.
that.
I would totally be
Peggy?
in support of that.
I think you'll find that you guys are busy, right? And not everybody will be able to make every meeting. So if we have some redundancy and backups, it'll be helpful for the committees. So
No, we do want
let's
to keep
go
you.
with 4.
So,
Yeah.
Excellent
That's fine,
idea.
that's fine.
want to move?
So moved.
Moved. To
Second.
appoint all 4 applicants as members of the rec committee.
Parks and Rec.
Yeah, second.
Seconded by Josh. Any further discussion? Thank you, Colleen. Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Welcome. Thank you very, very
Congrats,
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
We appreciate it.
Great outcome.
As if we didn't have enough hard decisions.
Right.
to make
I was like, we
tonight,
don't
but-
make that hard. Yeah.
Okay? Next item is the town plan review. And this continues a discussion that we've had, which we have structured tonight on chapter by chapter summations that each of us are going to provide, having been assigned those. And Lee, do you want to kind of take the lead and?
I printed out my sections.
Thanks. So
and then-
the intent of this was for the board to have an opportunity to highlight key elements of each of the chapters of the plan. It's an important but less formal conversation in advance of the 2 official public hearings that the select board must have under state law before adopting a new town plan. Those hearings are warned for January 22 and February 12. The goal being to hopefully adopt a new plan before the existing one expires toward the end of February. And so to help implement that, each board member agreed to take on several chapters, review them, and offer some brief highlights and elements of it, and perhaps illustrate if there were any questions or concerns that you may have. Now is a great time for all of us to hear those.
So I'm just
ahead,
trying to
chapter
think
one.
about the best way, excuse me, to use our time here, since we have about 20 minutes, right?
We want to just
I
step
think
through
it's-
the table, Jamie?
It might be best to maybe just go sequentially through the document and start with future land use, maybe? Start with chapter 1, and we have Dean and Jason here, so to the extent anyone has questions or wants input on sort of how we got to specific goals or recommendations,
You want to lead off,
sure they'll be
Josh?
willing to take the mic,
Well,
so.
yeah, and I can be really easy because it was my understanding that we weren't going to have this discussion today in this summary. So I've been collecting information and going out and finding some more information to sort of get some better detail with regard to priorities and feelings on how we got here. So I can defer my summaries until next week.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Split it
fine.
up a little bit.
Colleen, you want to start with
Sure.
3?
3. So I have extra copies, but my notes are really bulleted items. And so chapter 3 it's page 41 in the comprehensive plan, historic and cultural resources. And part of their initial definition is to identify, preserve, and protect the character and defining elements of the built environment and the landscape. And so in the comprehensive plan, it's literally what helps us define Shelburne. And it further goes into definitions, history, reaching all the way back to pre-European settlement, so Native American civilization and remains and evidence of that thereof. It further delineates the fact that there are 2 locations in Shelburne that are on the National Register of Historic Districts, which is the Shelburne Village and the Shelburne Farms. We have 1 National Historic Landmark, that's the Ticonderoga. We are on the State Survey of Historic Sites, which is Boswick Farms and Shelburne Shipyard. And then identified cultural resources are the craft school, museum. Those are 2 of, I think, 4 things that were listed in the plan. Their objectives, they had 6 listed. They really are focused about maintaining, conserve, protect, support, sustain. And so, but a couple of key points: maintaining town status as a certified local government, and that's capitalized. It's a thing that helps us get state funding. So maintaining that status gets us state funding for preservation of the above listed sites. Another objective is program for identification and inventory of archaeologic and historic resources. 3 is conserving those resources, and there was things in the plan that I didn't completely understand about identifying areas in which that we would have the right of first refusal if such a site were to be developed, and I didn't really understand. It didn't delineate it, but it's listed. Number 4 is protecting archaeologic evidence. So working with the DRB on approvals of development in sensitive areas that are thought to be sites of Native American civilization, and that's in the map MB12, and to make those developments contingent on archaeologic surveys first. 5th objective is supporting village, craft school, museum, farms in outreach education. And number 6 is sustaining the resources, which enhances property values. So they had 12 action items, and I'm not going to go through all of them. And when I say summarize, I really summarized. And part of it was working with zoning and non-regulatory techniques to encourage preservation and restoration and discourage demolition. Guiding village center development, and backyard infills, infill of backlots to maintain the size and character of the Shelburne Village. Another action, or a few other action items, involved updating their maps and inventory. And another action item is advising the select board of designation of new sites and landmarks. Educational outreach, cooperation with other organizations. It increases the awareness of the value of historic resources. And the last is to continually seek funding. And I know that one very collaborative project was between the Library Steering Committee, the Pearson Library Board of Trustees, and the Committee for Historic Preservation, and with regards to the town hall, and not only the town hall, but also with the development and design of the new Pearson Library. And one of the conversations in particular was about the design not competing with the town hall, that it needed to be architecture that's symbolic of this era, which is interesting, which isn't something that would have come to mind, but it was the people that are on this committee that support this. It's very important. So that's chapter 3.
Thanks, Colleen. You want to continue with 7?
7. Yeah, this was a big haul. All 2 pages of this. Chapter 7 is about childcare. It's page 65. Their goals were to encourage availability of affordable childcare within Shelburne, and to integrate childcare into the planning process. Objectives was to recognize the importance of adequate and affordable childcare, to encourage creation, expansion, continuation of services in home daycare and also larger centers, and then encourage the discussion of financing, infrastructure, business assistance, workforce development with state and regional leaders. Their action items include reviewing the bylaws to minimize obstacles to provision of childcare. This came up recently when we had the adult entertainment amendment, and with where would we place an establishment of that type, and how that affects, because it can't be within a certain number of yards of a school or a child care center. Updating assessment of the availability of childcare, and encourage school and providers to explore the state average daily membership reimbursement. So I have no idea what that is. We only have 2 in-home daycares in Shelburne now. That's it, 2. one of them is Puddle Jumpers, which is owned and ran by Elsa Bosma, and she's actually received awards for her child care center, or her in-home child care center, and she actually didn't know what that state average daily membership was. Encourage towns' larger employers to provide daycare, and I'm not sure if that happens. And then encourage programs to offset care gaps, so like vacations, after school, school start time. And in particular, it actually had in parentheses, working with the Pearson Library on those programs. So anyway, that is Chapter 7 in a nutshell.
Thank you, Colleen. Any questions? Mary, want to pick up with?
Thank you very much. First, I just want to say what a lot of work this entire plan represents, and I had the opportunity to speak with the chair of the commission at length about my 2 chapters to get greater clarity, and that really sort of just put the spotlight on how many volunteer hours are in this. So my 2 chapters are growth and development, and then I also did energy. Of course, the problem with growth and development is the seemingly irreconcilable problem of wanting to encourage growth and keep Shelburne the same at the same time. How we do that is pretty difficult. What's interesting to me and a concern is the town plan is sort of targeting a growth of 25 new residences a year. And what's interesting to me is, and sometimes we hear about this from our constituents, about old Shelburne versus new Shelburne. And I think old Shelburne, they're talking about really old Shelburne. I think they're really talking about pre-1960s Shelburne. Because prior to 1960, Shelburne didn't grow very much at all. But in the 60s, it started growing at a pretty fantastic rate, at a rate of about 107. Stop me if I'm going into too much detail. I know that we have time limitations, but this is kind of a history thing, so sorry. Anyway, so we were growing at the rate of about 107 new homes a year in the 60s and early 70s. And I guess I would call that the IBM era, right? And that's when Shelburne really kind of developed into a bedroom community that we know it today. But that growth has really slowed down, and though the town plan calls for and is targeting for a growth of 25 new homes, I can tell you that over the past 6 or 7 years, we haven't put 25 new homes down in Shelburne in any given year. The most has been 24 in the years 2013 and 2015, and surprisingly, and somewhat of a concern, in the last year we did 8. So I would regard this as a good, that the objective of having that level of growth is not too high, given our history, but it's ambitious given our very recent history with this. The thing that's most important about this particular chapter, in my opinion, is that the plan is embracing form-based zoning, and it's also wanting to direct growth to the areas where there's municipal water and sewer, which makes a ton of sense, particularly because our sewer is paid for by those who use it, and also putting growth in areas that's not going to adversely impact stormwater runoff and other environmental factors, and some of our jewels in Shelburne. Whoops. So to me, that means that this particular chapter is really well thought out, and
that's a theme that sort of makes its way through other sections of the plan as well, whether it's housing
key.
or transportation. It's a really important sort of anchor principle for the plan.
Yeah, and they also, the plan also suggests that we have another committee, like a Community and Economic Development Committee, and I like that as well. I've been wanting to see actually a town staff person have that role and be sort of an intermediary between development and planning and zoning. And I think the town plan is inching in that direction, although it didn't come right out and ask for a new staff person for that purpose. One thing that I found, the question becomes, how do we grow and hit that target of 25 new homes a year? And I think having a committee of volunteers to talk about how to get to that place will be key, and that's what's key about this particular chapter. The other chapter I had was energy, and I spoke with Jason about this, and it was sort of a pet chapter of his, from what I understand. And really, it's a pretty straightforward thing, right? We want to reduce our impact on the environment and reduce the amount of energy we use. Our electric bill for the town of Shelburne is $250,000 a year. A good portion of that is for our wastewater treatment. And we have to embrace reducing the amount of energy we use. There's lots of ways to do that. That is contemplated in the chapter. I did speak with Jason about my desire to see some areas in Shelburne that do have more solar. We're talking about that, of course, on top of the library, but I think there's also some town land that the town owns where we might be able to place solar, and we'd like to see that, pursue that possibility as well. So thanks again to the Planning Commission for all its hard work.
Yeah, thank you. We certainly all second that. Jason, you and your colleagues, and Dean. I reviewed Parks and Recreation. The plan introduces the significance of activities regarding parks and the very robust recreation program that we have. I think it made several very interesting suggestions, one of which was to develop a master plan for recreation, which I thought was a very intriguing idea. Another to give some serious thought to alternative means of funding rec programs, which I took to be example of possibly a larger picture of alternative sources of revenue for the town whole, much less the rec program. And urged age diversity and other contemporary features to the rec program, including potentially surveys of preferences. And we all know over time, preferred recreation has changed over time. The other chapter that I reviewed was towers and telecommunication facilities. It introduced the fact that we have an ordinance in place which is meant to minimize material adverse effect on natural resources and establishes preferred siting in several commercial zones for those facilities. It urges, and I thought importantly and well that it did, a substantial diligence on the part of town leadership to exercise the privileges that are in that ordinance and make our presence and case known rapidly and thoroughly to the state when it issues certificates of public good.
Good. So my sections were, the first one was housing. Housing is one that's adjacent to growth and development in a lot of ways. It's a relatively short section, but there's a lot packed in there, and it's interesting to see this. A lot of concepts in here that are new in some respect compared to the current plan. There's an emphasis on this notion of mixing rental and owned properties. I think in the past we've sort of just thought about owned properties being the driver, but the thinking is shifting a bit to just, think how can we sort of drive more rental housing as well. Affordable housing, of course, is a big theme throughout this. I believe we've held our 10% target. I think that's in the current plan. I don't know if you can confirm that, but I believe the percentages are the same. The other sort of evolution here within the housing section relates to trying to integrate the idea of protecting scenic, rural, natural areas and anchoring housing in growth areas. So these are very complementary sections in that respect, and they echo each other. So those were kind of the big themes that popped out. Mary already spoke about some of the targets with housing permits and COs. One other action in here that I think we probably will get into a little bit during the public hearing is we talk about inclusionary zoning. I think that is a new concept. It's probably, I don't think it's in the current plan, but a topic that is probably worthy of a little bit more discussion as a board, and during the public hearings, I'm sure we'll get into that. So that's housing in a nutshell. And the second section I had was transportation, which again is a section that has evolved in a lot of ways. From the current plan, it's a beefier section. There are many more goals. In housing, there's really one goal. Let's drive housing supply, and let's make sure that we're sensitive to where we put that housing. Transportation, there are a number of goals in here. Couple themes that jumped out are this idea of placemaking. And this is a topic that's near and dear to a number of the planning commissioners' hearts. And again, it sort of weaved its way through a couple sections in the plan, but the idea is to sort of goes without saying, but create places, right? As part of our transportation planning, let's make sure that we're sensitive to and thinking about, how can we orient transportation around people, around places. So that's a theme that pops out throughout this. Couple other goals in here that I thought were interesting. Much more emphasis on connectivity. So everything from sidewalks to bike lanes to this multimodal type of transportation. So that's a theme that really just jumps out as you read this new section to me. The commission talked a lot, even when I was on the commission, talked a lot about rethinking public work standards, things that, how do we build our sidewalks, right? Some of this stuff that you just don't think about day to day, but this section does actually start to address, let's rethink how we build some of this infrastructure, because it makes a difference in how we interact with the built environment. Those were the key themes that jumped out to me. There's a lot in here as far as recommended actions and objectives, and it's an ambitious section in a lot of ways. It's exciting as well when you read this, because it should energize us, I think, as we go through it and think about how can we sort of evolve our transportation corridors, because in a lot of ways it's fixed, but in many ways we have an opportunity to help drive it towards something that is much more pedestrian friendly, is much safer, right? I know we're going to talk about traffic safety later tonight, but again, a theme that is prevalent throughout this.
Thank you. It struck me that when all is said and done, and let's just guess that it'll be approved, there may be a point sometime later in the spring where we might sit together, the commission and ourselves, and take a look at recommendations with an eye toward maybe surfacing those that we think are maybe a category of really should be done, and a category of what can we do sooner than later, and a category of let's talk some more. It would seem to me that would inform any amendment or future change in the plan, as well as it would be really outstanding guidance for us in setting strategic directions for the year. My expectation is we will try to set a strategic direction as a board sometime in April, not long after the town meeting, and this would be excellent guidance. I think certainly we should encompass it, if it isn't treated as guidance. So I throw that out just as kind of an idea, Jason. There's so much work went into these recommendations. They're so thoughtful that I'd hate to see them, kind of expire on the page.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add as well, we've talked about the Planning Commission, but on the housing section, we have a housing subcommittee that helped inform a lot of that work. We have an energy subcommittee that informed a lot of the energy section, so a lot of hands on deck to get this to this point. The visual presentation is phenomenal. I think people are going to find it's just very user-friendly and such a nice, readable document that, to your point, I think we'll be much more willing to pull this out, during our week-to-week, month-to-month type discussions, because you can peel out a section and then just reference certain goals, and I don't know, I think it'll be much more living, breathing document compared to what we have now.
That's my suspicion too. I mean, due to the effort, but in a very meaningful way of incorporating it in what we do. And that can easily not happen or kind of get left on the sideline, and I wouldn't want to see that. So maybe we can think, Lee, about, think ahead. Because some of the ideas, like the master plan, is a really good idea, and the alternative revenues is a really good idea. So, anybody?
No, I would just, and in fact, that was one of the struggles that led me to try to find out more, is trying to understand, okay, how do you prioritize all of these very worthwhile recommendations, and what's the how do you put all that together? So I think that whole concept, rather than this just being, oh, that's a nice document, how do we put it? What's the implementation of it?
What's your sense, Mary, in terms of, for instance, energy conservation? Would it make sense to devote a bit of time on a future agenda to that subject? And
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This building needs to have an energy audit in a pretty significant way. The possibility of the town having its own solar field is worth pursuing. There is some town land that might lend itself to that. So whatever we can do to reduce our footprint and reduce our electric bill, absolutely.
Yeah, there you go. So that would be I think something very much to look forward to. And okay.
So we're on track. The public hearing dates again are the 22nd and February 12th. Okay.
Any other questions from you, Jason or Dean?
Is there anything that we can get you before the hearing based on what you've shared tonight?
No, I think we're well armed. Thank you.
I had to abandon my first holder because it got bollocksed up. So it's a really fine piece of work. A really fine piece of work.
Thank you.
Okay.
Gail would like to say
Lee,
Yes.
any final? Oh, sorry, Gail.
Anything here about the natural resources section?
We'll do that. We'll do that next week.
Oh, next week, okay.
Any other comment, Lee?
No, thank you.
Really
Okay.
good.
Thank you. Okay, next item is what we've all been waiting for. It's the budget review for fiscal year 2019-2020. And I'm going to repeat a comment that I made at the start of the meeting, which is we'd ask you to hold your comments on any specific item until we get there. We have a very substantial amount of work to do now, and at a point where we introduce an item that you have an interest in, we'll look to you for comment or remarks. So if you'll indulge us, we will appreciate that.
Like me to tee it up?
Yes, if you would, sir.
Thank you. So several weeks back, we had prepared an early draft of a budget that essentially incorporated all of the requests made by all of the department heads and those committees that typically participate. And the total net tax increase based on that draft budget was 10 to 11%, far more significant than the Select Board felt was appropriate. So the task they set forth was try to figure out where to cut, how to cut, and try to bring in a budget that was no more than a 5% tax increase. The grand list has grown slightly, not dramatically, so that helps offset some expense increases, but not all of them. So I spent a lot of time going through this with dramatic help from Peter Frankenberg. And we have a brief summary on the board. We can review these if you wish, but all of the red numbers up there are places where I have proposed cuts in the budget. And as you might imagine, trying to cut several $100,000 out of a budget is not an easy process. And it doesn't happen by $500 here and $1,000 there. Some of those help, but ultimately some more significant cuts need to be made. So just to highlight some of those proposals that are before us tonight, there's a proposal to not fund the open space budget anywhere near what it has historically been. It's been $30,000, then it's gone to $50,000. My original recommendation was to take a break from funding that for a year, which I know in some quarters would not be very popular. I understand the importance of land conservation. I used to be chair of a land trust, helped start one, did a lot of conservation projects. But $50,000 is a lot of money in an era where fiscal pressures are enormous and significant cuts have to be made. I've proposed cutting over $60,000 out of the fire department's capital budget. We took $25,000 out from a capital project for the rec department. They had hoped we could at last pave Beach Road. And it's a collaborative effort with all of us, but I have to own it as the manager's proposed budget, proposing to take that off the table this year. Proposing taking $25,000 out of highway paving, $10,000 out of the salt budget, $10,000 out of stormwater planning and engineering. The list goes on. Everything that was proposed by a committee or a department head was important to them and important to the health and vitality of our community. At the same time, we have some dramatic fiscal pressures, at least this year and next, with other debt that must be paid. So we are in the unenviable position of having to propose some cuts to things that everybody would like to see happen. The proposal that's before us all tonight would result in a 5.9% tax increase, still not at the target the Select Board has set for me and for us. So we'll need to have some more conversations about whether the proposed cuts are the right ones, are appropriate in nature, appropriate in amount. Should different cuts be made? There are some line items that look like dramatic increases in the budget, but that are funded externally. For example, there's over $60,000 of projects proposed in the town clerk's budget, but those are funded by recording fees. They're not funded by tax dollars. The money is there to do those things. There's a dramatic increase in the rescue line for operations. That would be to buy 2 new Stryker power stretchers, which are needed these days for the ambulances. But that's all funded by external fees. So it looks like a big number in the budget, over $500,000, but at the same time, it's 100% funded offline, if you will. It's not taxpayer dollars. There's roughly $250,000 in the fire department budget and in the rescue budget for new radio and communications gear. And as you'll recall, we applied for a federal grant for roughly that amount of money. If we don't get the grant, we don't spend the money. If we do get the grant, we only have to pay 5% of that. So it's roughly $25,000 for a $500,000 value. So there are some numbers in here that look really big or may look like dramatic increases. They're either funded offline or won't happen if we don't get the grants. So I just wanted to point those out as we start to go through this, that there are those kinds of programs that are not always what they may appear to be. Otherwise, from there, I'm sure we'll have conversations with various parties, various departments and committees who will have their own ideas, questions, or concerns. But that's That's the general lay of the land. As I say, where we are right now would result in a 5.9% increase. Peter informs me if we want to get to the target of 5%, we need to cut somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000 additionally on top of this current proposal. So I hope that's a helpful launch pad for wherever we.
Can you
Go from
explain
here.
how all that, what you just said fits into what's on the screen in this that we got emailed on Saturday? Because some of the cuts that you were talking about I could track on here, but not all of them, like the open space I can't find.
So originally I had, that's down, it's the third line up from the bottom.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So originally, my
Got it.
recommendation was $0. Then it turned out with the grand list adjustment, we had a little more flex, and this
Got it.
proposal would have 15,000.
Thanks so much.
All right, first, we can't thank you enough. I mean,
Well, and I
this is
can't
really-
thank Peter enough for a lot of background work.
It's a great job. This is for the public to know, this is an obligation of charter for this to be presented at this time. And this starts the fine tuning in earnest. Secondly, my sense is that we should not approve a year-over-year tax rate increase of greater than 5%. And that means we have more cutting to do. And my third sense is we should step through the categories, taking care not to dwell too long on some items, pending those, if need be, to the next meeting. We will meet a week from tonight on budget. And I'd be happy to start that process by suggesting, under Select Board, that we zero out Select Board salaries.
Fine with that.
And my colleagues we can kind of, murmur yes or no and give Lee a little more direction if we think that item is worthy.
Which those stipends probably equate to about $0.05 an hour for all the time you folks
Well,
spend on
I
this.
think we're our own best example of cutting. And I'll feel it, but you can't cut everybody but yourself. So if that seemed to be some nods around the table, and that should be a consensus suggestion to you.
So that would be $6,300.
Yep.
Could we just for the benefit of the board again and for the public, the long-term debt percentage when we're talking about 5.9, can you just remind me what percent the long-term debt, the bond debt
The-
represents?
that?
Yes.
Sure.
Just so that everybody understands what that piece is, and I think there might just be a conversation around the 5%, that's all,
Yep.
around that target.
As I recall, the long-term fixed debt and other fixed obligations are roughly 4%.
Right.
By
Yeah,
themselves.
I was gonna say
That's what I
Before we,
thought, 3 point.
before we're out of the starting
I
gate.
think the
it's
nut
close
was
to
4.2, something like that, yeah.
Okay.
So it's not a lot of latitude there
Right.
to
No, we would be virtually
meet the
flat
target.
based on,
So, and then the other thing that I think probably should be pointed out is we knew that these next 2 years were going to be very lean because we have 2 more years left of some very large debt that's been left over, and that will be done by 2020. But the big loan debt that we've acquired by starting the library has kicked in this fiscal year. So these 2 years of overlap, we knew this was going to be a little bit more intense of a budget season.
all right, moving on, legal expense is flat. I would judge there's a little bit of an
Yeah.
unknown quantity to that.
How
I
are we
think
doing on that, just
So far
year to
this year.
date, right? Like, I know we've
We've
obviously
been-
had a bad year in the sense of blowing the budget by,
We've had a few
Yeah.
bad years. We're doing well
as far
this
as
year,
budget
keeping
management.
things.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I
dead
just
on.
wanted to get a gut check on. I think
Yeah.
it is, right? It's under,
We are keeping that in
Okay.
line so far this year.
Okay.
Can I
Good.
make a comment on that? I don't, first of all, I don't see it on the sheet because I assume you didn't cut, there's no increase or cut.
Right, so
It's
this
flat.
was,
It's
Yeah.
flat at
this was intended to
60,000.
highlight
Yeah.
the first
I think we
draft
should
of the
reduce
second.
it to 50,000. 50,000 is $4,166, if I've done my math right, per month. It's a lot of time.
yeah, I'm just asking, that's why I asked,
How
how
about more?
are we
How about
managing
more?
against that 60? Right. I
You
mean,
have a
in the
guesstimate?
past, we haven't managed very well to
Where are
that
we now?
60.
Do we?
You got
we
a
have any
6-month guesstimate, Peter, on outlay so far?
We're about 38% of budget right now, and
Well-
over 50% through the year.
Right.
So that's pretty good.
Following Mary's suggestion, nods.
We can,
I'm,
It's-
I,
it's worth throwing ideas out there and see where we land with them. Next week, we'll have the formal hearing, but this is a good opportunity to throw out, to
Yep.
brainstorm.
yep.
I'd
See
take
where it all
10 off.
lands.
I don't think we need to spend, what's the hourly rate we pay, Peter? Do you know off the top of your head?
I believe it's 165 an hour, which is a fairly typical municipal
Sure,
rate
yep.
and less than most private
Right,
accounts would charge.
so 5, 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Yep.
Manager's office, Lee has wielded his own knife.
Well, reflecting my salary compared to what otherwise might have been budgeted, and then reflecting also restructuring of that office with a second person who I'm presuming will be at a lower pay rate than we had before.
Yep.
So trying to hold the line there.
So where
And then
where
we
is
talked
that?
about decreasing it by 8,500. So how was that made possible? Just if you remind me.
So Peter reminds me that Betty Marcher, who's our webmaster, is also paid out of that town manager's salary line, which I hadn't realized. So any further cuts to that, we'd have to look into more carefully before cutting it artificially low. So we can do that, but I'm not
Okay.
sure we
So
can.
that's item 5 here, right?
Yes.
First 5.
And again, these are increases or decreases based on the comparison of the first draft to the
Yes.
current draft.
Yeah.
They're not the absolute numbers that
Right.
may have been.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comment, manager's office? Administrative services? I thought the increase in computer hardware from 10 to 18 was pretty significant.
You know what?
Which number
You
is
know what,
that?
Jerry, it would be helpful if you would tell us what you're reading off of.
I'm reading off the budget.
He's on
Which
page
one, the one we
5.
just got handed this evening?
No,
Wait, okay, page 5.
No, this is just the sum.
I understand that.
Oh, I don't know what you got, I'm sorry. Yes, it must be.
Oh, okay, so page,
Thank you.
Yeah,
page
so-
5,
Yeah.
and
looking
then
at
line, what, 22?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at 15, administrative
23.
services, in particular 23, computer hardware.
23,
Yeah.
page 5.
I'm sorry, Mary, I didn't,
quite all
it was
right.
in the packet.
Go ahead.
So
I
Peter,
had something
I
else in
believe that
administrative
included, we are, number one, there's 2 elements here. One, we're way behind on hardware improvements and upgrades, and I know how to get us very good prices, so we're doing pretty well on that. But we're way behind on that, and in this day and age, as you can imagine, if somebody's computer fails, it's almost like, how do they do their job? But the other piece of that, and the reason I think for that increase is the current backup system that we have, if we had a major failure or a hacking type incident, it could take us 3 to 5 days to get back up and running. And this incorporates a proposal, maybe we can do it for less, that would change the nature of our backup system to a cloud-based system so that hopefully if we had a major incident, we could get back up and running in a day or a day and a half.
Okay,
So that's the reason this shows what appears to be a significant increase.
okay.
Okay. With, a general comment on the administrative services is that, sort of going through this and going through, when you go through bills, I think there should be an effort made to sort of put together administrative services across all of the departments, for example, office supplies.
Agreed.
That, you go through, and I don't know how to put a number on that, but I think there's where savings can be met. And I think the same thing happens with IT support. And I think trying to put those kinds of things together so we're more integrative across the board, across all the departments, so we have a consistent approach to these things, may gain us some efficiency across across town.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
plans
agree.
are afoot to do both of those very things.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the proposed cuts in the police department on IT support reflects that very concept and hope that we will create a more integrated approach townwide to IT support
Yeah.
rather than separated. Same thing with some of my current thinking on the other position in the manager's office that would integrate HR issues and integrate centralizized purchasing. So
Yep.
we're not buying paper towels a piece at a time or paper clips a box at a
Yeah,
time.
exactly, yeah.
And for those very
That's
reasons.
that's a great idea, and I think we should address that, don't you, Peter, sometime in the spring, so there's ample time to make the adjustments in presentation.
Yeah, and I think we do a fairly good job now of somewhat centralized. We only use probably 3 or 4 vendors for office supplies. We
Yeah.
do try to purchase in bulk wherever possible, like copy paper, things like that. So, but certainly a better overall view of the purchasing is certainly couldn't hurt, I would say.
Yeah.
And then the other one was line 16 on page 5, the technical assistance, and cutting 5,000 more out of that and bringing it down to 12,500. And you thought that you'd be able to make that work.
Yeah, that's one of those, it's tough to predict how much consulting service we may need, and part of this increase was trying to bake in the thoughts that Josh had suggested about getting some outside CPA or other support to help address some of the audit issues. But if we're needing to cut places, that's another one that we can, we'll work hard to manage with what we're given.
All right, good idea, Colleen. We
Yeah,
all
it is a good
comfortable
idea.
with that? Okay. Any
So
other?
those are more one-off consultants, right? If you need a,
If we needed to hire a surveyor to resolve a
right,
dispute
yeah,
of some sort,
or like
in
the
this
cell
case,
tower, right, cell tower
Right.
consulting.
we've
something
been
like that.
using someone
Yeah.
on the side to help us negotiate those
Okay.
leases.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion.
Okay,
Another one we talked about was, oh, you're gonna have to give me a minute to find out where it is. It's the town committee support, and it's pretty hefty. It's like 5,000 in there.
no, I think
That's
maybe
all.
we'll get, why
I
don't
think
we
that's
get
at
to
the
that
end.
Yeah,
when
it's
we
at the
do,
end.
Colleen, in order. huh?
It's at the
Okay.
end.
I think we're all kind of feeling that one. But how about we just, how about we
Keep marching.
move on from, to elections?
There's nothing to cut
Yeah.
there, it's a
No.
little less.
It's a decrease due to an off year for elections, so.
And
Right.
in finance and insurance, we're proposing a 5% increase in the finance director's salary.
That's correct.
The annual audit, do you anticipate, Peter, we have an extended 1 year on the current audit contract. Do you anticipate any significant increase when we bid that for a new auditor?
No, we have an option to extend the current audit 1 more year.
Oh, great.
We'll see where we're at with that.
Oh,
We'd like
great.
to go multi-year, but again, with the transition in managers, we thought we have the opportunity to change auditors after they complete this year. So-
Great. Okay,
And we are anticipating the possibility of having to do a single audit under federal guidelines this
Yeah.
year, which is a
and you've
more,
provided for that.
more complicated and expensive
Yeah.
process.
Okay, gang? On to town clerk treasurer. We're also proposing a 5% increase in the town clerk salary. Are there any other issues? Were you commenting, Lee, about records, the automation and preservation records, which have been dropped a third?
Yes, lines 8 and 9, the recording software supplies and records automation, even though one of them is increasing, one of them's dropping, those are funded, as I mentioned, offline by recording fees or other external sources.
Okay. Planning and zoning. One of the prize-winning presentations. It's down 7%. Any comments? Hearing none. Assessing.
Assessing runs an awfully lean ship for the fundamentally important work they do, which is
Absolutely.
the basis for
Absolutely, in both of those
Everything we
cases.
do.
Buildings and grounds?
There's a couple here. Hold on a second. Was this the building, wait a minute, the building maintenance reserve, was this in this one, Lee?
No, that's later on.
Is
in
that
the-
later?
yeah,
Okay.
we'll-
That's different than the town center building
I had
maintenance?
some on the original budget, but this is somewhat different than what we reviewed in our notebooks.
Did it reflect your
Well,
suggestions?
the line numbers change, right?
Oh.
So, it's hard for me to follow the line from, I had line 5, 12, 13, and 14 for Darwin's presentation, for example. So I can't tell anymore. What he had, town center building maintenance. He has it at 15K, but the justification provided to us was only for 8,700K, and so I
Correct.
couldn't figure out where that difference was.
Peter, did that include some of the repairs or improvements in this building? Carpeting, stairway?
Yeah, some of the capital improvements to this building, the stair treads in the entryway need to be replaced, so I think that's the main difference there.
But
Okay.
didn't include painting, right?
No.
That
Painting
would
was
be-
separate.
Yeah, that would be in the, potentially in the operating expense.
Yeah.
He also had, I noted that to maintain our fields in the 17-18 year, it was 3,500. It was 8,000 in 18 and 19. It's not 8,000 again for this year, and I'm wondering why there's such a big bump from one year to another and why it stays static.
Yeah.
So we go,
Item
Well,
43.
Page 6.
Field maintenance, okay.
so,
Does that include some equipment cost?
no.
It's not really equipment, I think it's more in terms of how much watering he has to do.
Amendments?
There's an irrigation system there.
Fertilizer,
We can
that
never
kind of
really
stuff?
predict, how
I
much
see that
depending
you
on the
took
weather.
out
if that's gonna be.
1,000. I was recommending taking out another, I was recommending that we reduce it to 6 or 6,300.
6,043. Josh, agreeable?
I'm still trying to find it
Page 6.
Would drop it
Page
from 8 to
line
6?
43.
on 43.
You know what, when you talk about it like this, it sounds so picayune, but they do add up.
They add up, that's right.
And we need to add up.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, and Betsy's already gone.
okay, agreed. Bike
And
ped
I
trails
just-
is 10, that had been 15, I know, in an original, and earlier.
That's
remember?
correct, yes.
Yep.
That's
So
so,
this one, hang on. Okay,
Okay,
so this is telling us we're going down 5 from the first budget,
from
right?
15 to
The first
10.
pass, so
Yeah.
now we're saying 10?
yep.
and it also looks as though you've taken out all of his capital budget, which came in at 1,800,
Do we know, so this would pick up the,
18,000, I mean.
So the thought
this would
is,
pick up the Bay Road?
the thought
Tie
is
Hall
to
Path.
fund for next year the link between the fishing access
Yeah.
and the Bay Park access. That's what this 10 would be for. There's another 10 in the highway budget for other traffic safety improvements. There
Yeah.
was an 18 in there for some undefined Bay Road corridor improvements, but nothing was, to my
Gone.
knowledge, was actually specified or proposed there. I know they've been discussed in the past, but
So, for capital projects, though, maybe we want to visit that for a second and at least have an explanation. It's line 45 on page 6. It was line 14 on the original breakdown of the budget. Darwin had 18,000. I didn't find that there was any justification for more than 8,000, which was painting Pearson. And it looks like you've taken it all out, and I wonder if
This painting Pearson shows up,
later in a different place?
yeah, and,
is that elsewhere, Peter?
yeah, I'm pretty sure it went from
Line
14 to
41.
12, didn't it?
Pearson is on line 41
Yeah,
of the,
Pearson
Pearson
Building
building
Maintenance.
maintenance.
yeah, it went from 14 to 12.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving on, stormwater. I was pleased to see that Lee picked up on, and of course, greatly apologetic that I was not able to make the one-day event. Really sorry about that. I missed it terribly. And I had a few questions for Lee and Peter that they were very thoughtful in addressing and prompt to do so. And these were a series of questions I had, and I see you've since clarified.
Good.
So, yeah, so I was pleased to see that.
So, stormwater planning, which is line 5 on page 7, right now that's slated at 20,000, but we had anticipated having the stormwater utility fee, and much of that's not being done yet, or done. And so for this calendar year, for this fiscal year, something we had talked about was just reducing it to 15,000 and making that work until we have a utility in place. And again, it doesn't seem like much, but 5,000 here and 5,000 there
Good point.
does make a
You
difference.
want to drop at 5?
So what, yeah, before we do that, I mean, does Chris support that? I mean, is it going to start to,
Well, as you might imagine, every cut
yeah,
feels
Right.
harmful to someone. But just so you know, between the first draft and the second draft, I did let all department heads or committee chairs know of the proposed cuts so that they'd be aware. I didn't want anyone to feel blindsided
Yeah,
here
good for you.
tonight to hear it for the first time. Of course, Chris would like more money to do the work that we all know needs to happen. He's also well aware of that we're going to be cutting his budget, and he, needless to say, wasn't thrilled about it, but he understood it and accepted it.
Okay.
The reality is, when we get the utility up and running, we're going to need to be spending more than the 200 plus contemplated
exactly.
here.
Yeah.
For now, again, trying to keep the tax increase reasonable,
yeah.
we knew we had to make some adjustments.
Colleen, you want to suggest a drop to 15,
Yeah,
which is flat?
yep.
Which is what?
Others of us,
Remind me which line?
this is
Line
number
5.
5, page 7.
7,
Okay, so from 20 to 15.
yeah.
Which would be flat. Okay, I support that. Okay, harbor master,
As I understand it, the harbor master is a moneymaker for the town. I don't recommend making it harder for him
No.
to do his excellent work.
we
and-
want to be sure he gets a birthday card and, yeah.
He's also made me aware that, just north of us in Burlington, there are quite a few more slips and docks being proposed in the near future. So there'll be more competition. We don't have an enormous waiting list for mooring spots. So Dan's recommending we keep things pretty much as they are in terms of what we charge for those things. He does very good work for us. And as I say, in the end, it's a net plus for the town, so.
All right. We're ready for the next item, police? My first suggestion is to cut $10,000 from overtime and double time.
I think that's a great idea.
I think that's a management matter.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that's a tough one. I inquired in depth about that. I can just at least report to you what I've been told. As you might imagine, with a full-time 24/7 police department, and between training needs, sick days, vacation days, there's almost always somebody who's out for a legitimate reason. And unlike other departments, if one of us is sick and we call in sick, the world doesn't come to an end. But with police department, you can't run short shifts, so you have to call somebody in. You've got to have 2 officers on duty. They are working very hard. Every week, they sit down together as a management team now and review these things. I can tell you right now, there are some of the staff who are offering on their own accord to move their shifts around to cover shifts at regular time rather than overtime. So they're making a concerted effort to keep this in line as it is. I know this line was less in the past and ended up being spent because there wasn't really a choice. It's a big number. It feels like something maybe could be cut from that and still keep it in line. What I'm informed from the chief and the department is this is a fair and reasonable number. So I only offer that for information.
I would still suggest that it be cut.
yep.
It's a 30% increase. Now, if there's an anomalous situation from the prior year, which it may well be from 108 to 1, from 150 to basically 108 back to 140, that's maybe more understandable.
Yep.
It was at 150 though.
My
It's
understanding
a little
is-
volatile, right?
sorry.
I guess that's the nature.
Yeah.
My understanding is that the increase from their perspective reflects the reality of what they actually have needed to
Well, I'm sure it
spend.
does. I'm sure it does, Lee, but it also is a management decision. So maybe some training is not held when that training is held. Maybe that training is held at a different time. Maybe there's a long-term schedule about what training won't interfere. You can't obviously predict who has to be in court, but I'm willing to feel that that ought to be a consideration.
So, but I have a few other items in police that I wanted to discuss. Maybe we should consider all of those before we talk about that one in particular. We talked about the capital improvement that they asked for 15,000 for the non-lethal equipment. And I wasn't here during the budget presentation, and I understand that their presentation was very convincing. And my question was, this came from, there was nothing in the budget item last year for something like this, and then out of the blue, they asked for 15,000. And I know that there was, a very scary situation. And, but the question is whether they needed the full 15,000. If they got half of that, 7,500, what would they do? Could they purchase half the equipment that they need and they could purchase another half next year? Or would they save it because they has to be purchased all at once? And we talked about it, but I'm not sure if you were able to readdress it with Chief Noble or not.
Yeah, I don't say this to criticize him at all. I didn't get a really clear answer on whether the half and half approach works. From my perspective as manager, I support the full 15,000 for two reasons. One, from an officer safety and incident management perspective. Right now, we don't have a whole lot of options between sort of hand-to-hand combat or shooting somebody if there's a serious incident. The non-lethal offers a middle ground to try to deal with a very difficult incident or person in less potentially damaging ways. The other part of that is if we avoid one serious injury, whether to an officer or a suspect, or avoid a lawsuit over an incident, this 15,000 will pay for itself 100 times over. There was a virtually all-day incident just in Arlington yesterday, and if you read the news article, there's discussion about sort of wishing they had a non-lethal middle ground. That was a case where a person was actually shooting at the state troopers. And so in that case, I guess they felt they had no option but to shoot back, and the person's injured, and you've all seen what happens when that happens. Now you got two officers out on administrative leave, so that talks about overtime. You get the public relations aspect of the police being portrayed as bad people for having had taken that approach, and then the risk of a lawsuit over a personal injury to somebody.
But the
So
question is it divisible?
Yes, it is.
Right. I mean,
Can
that's
you
the thing.
do
It's
10,000 worth?
anything is
Absolutely
possible.
divisible, because the report that we got from Aaron was that they want to buy these types of guns that do things that.
Stun.
No, it's not stun, it's like,
Bean bags and pepper
bean
balls.
bags,
Disable.
and- yeah. So, you don't have to buy them all at once, is my understanding from the presentation that we received.
It's a numbers thing. So, yes, you might not have one in every car, but that doesn't mean that that the car that had it in it couldn't get to where it's needed fairly quickly.
I think a lot of this got generated by the incident at Harbor Watch when there was an individual with a machete, and what the chief told us is that they had to wait for Burlington, for quite a while, for Burlington to come with the equipment that they ended up using that was less lethal to subdue this gentleman. So what I didn't ask is if 15,000 is what was necessary to arm every Shelburne police officer with some less lethal item. But I agree with Colleen that, put it in half this year and another half next year. I'm sure next year they'll have other capital needs as well, but, you know, and I'd love to meet everybody's capital needs. It would be lovely, but it's not possible. So I agree with Colleen.
And some of the things I wasn't clear about, like the fact that they have a 75% increase, if they want $15,000 for non-lethal equipment, but then line 48 is a 75% increase for increased firearms and ammunition. Is that ammunition for the non-lethal? Is it not included? I don't understand that one.
I'd have to find that out for you.
Okay, and
in
then,
the case of police photos, I
Yeah,
have a
police
similar,
photos.
I'm sorry, Colleen.
nope, that's it. That was my other one.
I have a
for it.
similar question, whether that's a double from
Double.
6 to 12, and it's a similar
big
question
number.
about whether that could go from 6 to 9.
Yeah, my understanding on that one is it's not really police photos any longer, but it's more
Digital.
Digital, I understand.
backup. So they all have the body cams, which have dramatically greater storage needs.
But again, the question is, can these be staged? Do these have to be funded wholesale?
Understood.
In this case, a double amount in budget, or can a 50% increase do for the year?
And then the other one is line 36, community outreach. I'm not exactly sure what that entailed, but it was a 163% increase from 6,500 to 17,300.
Yeah, I thought that was our yearly obligation, that 6,500. Where is this?
So the reason for that change is the first year the community outreach team was funded, it was funded in part through the Social Services Committee budget, which they weren't particularly
Right.
enthusiastic about, but that
It was
decision
theft.
was made that
Right.
year.
Right.
It was
And then
theft.
after that, it's been incorporated as a regular part of the budget.
Oh, so this is
That's
flat.
the-
This
So
is
this is-
functionally
True
flat?
that's the
This is a true
cost.
estimate for next year.
Okay.
Shelburne actually does well in the current program
Allocation.
because it's being considered on a population proportionality basis,
Yeah.
which doesn't necessarily reflect actual calls for service. So
Okay.
this number is an actual estimate, and we benefit from it the way it's being currently divided among the participating communities. Richmond is joining in for next year, so there'll be an extra
good, because it's been a
person
great
added,
success,
but now
yeah.
spread over an extra community.
Any other-
On line 41, the travel conferences, I mean, over the years, there's been a big increase. And unless this is, required training, I think that probably can be cut in half. It's always nice to go to conferences, but sometimes that's a luxury. So unless it includes required training, because there is a separate line for police training, of 15,000. So I think the conference line can be cut.
Good catch.
Remind me about, gosh, I wish they were here. I thought that there was something about the fact that maybe it was Fortin that did a lot of this budget was him going to conferences, and we actually received like state awards. Is this ringing any bells for anyone else? For all of our conferences and training. And
I thought
do
that
you remember
was something
Warden
else,
coming
but, yeah.
before us and telling about how our police officers are incredibly well trained, but that there's state and federal regulation that are requiring even more training?
Right, and that's what I thought, that's
Yeah.
under the training.
And the CBA
And-
does too.
Yeah, there's $15,000 for training.
Yeah.
And so.
I just remember
with-
something about Fortin doing training, and because he did that, we actually received funding from the state because of it.
He
That
worked
it-
a lot of grant
Yeah.
projects, Governor's Highway Safety, that paid for his participation, but yeah, this would be separate from that
Oh, okay.
sort of thing.
Okay.
My sense, Lee, is that maybe the best next step here is to sit with the chief
Yes,
and approach this on a whole budget basis.
and I
And maybe
presume,
drop that 6.1, however is best felt. But I think the questions of divisibility are pretty important. I mean,
Yep.
it wouldn't have been an expectation, obviously, for us to see 2 or 3 year stage funding in an ordinary routine budget submission. So no one's finding
Right.
fault. The
Right.
question is, we can't afford the full project cost, perhaps. And
Understood.
can it be divided into 2 years? If not, no. If it's instrumental, fine. But if it can, or you can buy 4 instead of 8, then I think those are decent questions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same thing with 45 in tires, there's a
Yeah.
huge increase in tire.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay? On to fire.
So as mentioned, my initial proposal cut 62,000 and change from capital. There were three pieces to that puzzle. One was taking out, upgrading or replacing the sign on the station, not improving the stairwells for a year. And then I knew there were questions about replacement of car one, and so I was proposing again similarly, can we either do it for less or split it over 2 years? The 50,000 here is a proposal actually would require voter approval if you wanted to go that route, to actually create a fire apparatus reserve fund and start putting money toward those very expensive replacements. I know the chief is here and the officers have talked, and they may have a different approach to trying to save some money and still accomplish what they feel are the essential needs of the department.
So the 50 in line 19 represents a $52,000 plus reduction
62
from the first pass?
from the first pass.
Yeah, that's what
I'll
I'm trying to make
also-
sense of.
52.
This is 52,630, but I don't see that.
Well, that's
on
the
this.
reduction from the first pass. So it's showing 50 now, so it was, do the math, right? It was 100K.
Okay. Stand
Right?
corrected.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Also proposed to cut the daytime station coverage stipend back to 5,000 to reflect how it's really been working so far, at least this fiscal year. We had 12.5 in there last year, I believe.
There's a good relative value, Lee. Is that 7,500 best spent on stipend versus a boat?
Well, I believe the boat expense that's in here is the mooring cost, right, for the
Most
marine
of the
unit?
expenses are just annual expenses, mooring, fuel, maintenance.
It's all operational?
The boat doesn't do anything.
Okay. Okay,
But again, the officers may have a different approach to a budget proposal.
If I could.
So we had an officers meeting last night and discussed the budget issues. I had planned to put a proposal together, get to Lee today, but my plans were changed unfortunately to
Yes.
other issues. So I didn't get that done. I will get that done and send it to Lee. We did kind of go over our numbers and came up with a different solution. What I would offer is our budget this year was only 4.5% higher than last year's budget. The cuts are proposed are a 17% cut to our budget. We've worked the numbers differently, and we can get it down to about a 8% cut, so it would be a little less painful for us. It would still put us down, so my budget would only be a 2% increase from last year. But we work, and I understand every department is tight, and we work very hard every year to maintain consistent numbers because of what we work off from previous years. The only times we usually have increases are for percentage increases from people we purchase hose from and equipment from, and that has to be included, and we can't avoid that. That, unfortunately, is every year, and I can't help that. But our normal budget, operating budget, doesn't go up more than 4% a year, and it hasn't since I've been chief, and this is my 7th budget. So we stay within a very tight line. We have a very small budget as it is. Our proposal I want to offer to Lee is his original proposal was cutting 57 and change out. We've got it down to cutting about 30,000 out, which is still 10% of my entire budget. So I'd like to get that to Lee and let him look at that first. One of the biggest concerns I have is with the replacement of car one. Our apparatus rotation, as you know, is on a 20-year rotation. We work very hard to make sure our equipment lasts 20 years. We're getting 30 years out of our tanker. If we start pushing out different apparatus each year or cutting what we can purchase an apparatus for, it's going to reduce what we work with. But it's also going to end up starting to compound where you're going to have apparatus coming 1 or 2 years apart as opposed to 5 or 6 years apart. So I don't like doing that. It'll end up biting us down the road. The last couple of years, we haven't been able to spend everything we put in for because of other issues in the town. But I think the apparatus is something we can't play with. I really am firm on that fact. That's got to happen. Otherwise, we start operating with vehicles that either need more maintenance or are not going to run as effectively as we want them to. Today's a perfect example. I realized the guys just got back. There were 7.5 hours at a fire call. There'll be another hour and a half station cleaning equipment. That stuff runs all day long. Engines run for 7, 8 hours at a time. They have to be maintained. They have to be in great shape. Our highway department does a great job doing that for us, but it just goes to reflect that if we don't take care of the apparatus and the equipment, it's not going to get the 20-year life out that we expect. So if we start pushing out rotations, it's going to make maintenance costs go up, and it's going to just compound issues down the road. So I really don't want to touch on that, but like I said, I'll get Lee what we went over last night, this week, to see if it's a better solution, and we can go from there.
Thanks, Chief. Of course, again, the accomplishment tonight is to provide you with our thinking and what we feel are opportunities for further reduction to reach a goal that we feel is important. And Lee will digest all of this, and no doubt with Peter's, in the company of Peter, he'll provide us with some recommendations based on the whole. So, okay, anything else? Fire? Public safety and dispatch. I'll lead off again. I think we should think very seriously about the overtime and knock 3,000 off it. And for the same rationale, to me, it's a question of management. And we have the management skills and experience, and I think if those are applied, that we could budget that for less money.
Agreed.
Any other comments, dispatch?
Just a stupid
Like
question.
it's only 2.9% above it.
What uniforms does dispatch wear?
They have required
They do have to wear
Okay.
proper shirts.
polos, sweatshirts that have the logo.
That's a
They are-
contract provision.
It's a contract.
Union contract.
Yeah, oh, I understand, but it
Yes.
was $2,000 a few years ago, $800 2 years ago, $3,500.
It's replacement cycle and exchange of items, I think, change of, yeah.
I can look into that, but that's my presumption is things have worn out and needed to be
but
replaced.
why
They do
would-
wash their equipment, most of it at home, so they're, it's not like we're paying for their
Understood,
cleaning.
but what I don't understand is you look at a trend, right? So that's why we have the prior years to look at. So it's $2,000, then it's $800, then it's $3,500, I can get that, maybe some replacement, but why is it $3,500 2 years in a row?
How about I find that out for you?
Thank you.
Good question, good
Related to
point.
the bargaining unit contract too, and what the requirements are there. So that
Yeah,
can-
if
that
it
can be
is, then there's
considered.
nothing we can do about it, but if it's not,
So we took line 32 down from 70 to 20, is that right? If I'm
Yes.
following this?
Yes. So
And
that
what was in that?
There were two capital
With the building
proposals.
security and,
Oh, the
Right.
security
20K
cameras,
for the building
surveillance.
security, 50,000 for the camera system. We felt it was essential, legally and otherwise, safety-wise, to do
Yeah.
the lock system, camera system.
That's the 20.
So the 50 is
yeah.
deferred.
Cameras.
And the 50, what was the other project?
That would have been replacing all the camera surveillance
Okay.
around the building.
you know. And no doubt, we're gonna end up with a short list of things that couldn't be funded, but it will have priority, and no doubt they'll take some precedence next year. I mean, I think we'll learn from the experience and,
Yep.
Okay, any other questions about safety and dispatch? Highway?
Just, what is it? Line 9 on page 9. Streetlight installation and upgrade.
I think we're on page 8 still.
Well,
All right.
Coleen's up
It's
under
highway.
next page.
It's still highway.
Oh, okay.
It just continued. And then knocking that down to 5,000
Street light.
from 10, and I know you'd already decreased it. But just slowing down the replacement, and you had said that there was nothing that was pressing.
9.
Nothing we would do for 5 or 10 or even 20. So that started at 20, we brought it down to 10 in this current draft, and I think the suggestion is take another 5,000 out.
I'm okay with that.
Yep,
Everybody?
yep.
So
No,
every time we talk, I know you guys talk a lot about the paving, but every time we hear from Paul, it's if we start trying to save pennies on this, we're going to end up paying a lot more down
It's
the road.
exactly the same
Right, and
legitimate
So-
argument that the chief
Right.
just
No,
made.
understood,
Yeah.
and I'm
And it
sensitive
would be
to
really
that.
helpful to sort of have a sense of that kind of cycle, which I don't have.
Right. We
that-
just have one
well,
year.
It's just like, we need to do more paving. Well, and I know he has this
He's
information.
got a plan, yeah.
But it'd be really just nice to understand how those cuts would affect.
Right. 5 years out.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to return to the Irish Hill grant. Did you get a response from the grant maker about whether we could delay that a year?
We could probably delay it no more than 6 months, but that doesn't help us.
Which
And
line is that?
so this is the Irish
11.
Hill Ped Grant. It's in here at 80,200. It's an 80% reimbursement, so we're in for roughly
No,
16.
I understand, but the 16 grand out of pocket.
It
And the
would,
question is, could we delay that a year?
the short answer is no.
And the grant maker said that?
Dean checked. I mean, anything is possible, but it would greatly harm our chances of actually doing that project, and certainly harm any future.
Why would that be?
Well, these types of grants typically have a certain amount of time within which you're supposed to start the project, and then there's an end date where you're supposed to have it done.
So we'd be
So
pressured in time to complete it?
We would be harming our own interests to hold off on this.
Well, but our own interest includes budget here, Lee.
I understand.
So I'm not accepting that there's another interest that we're talking about at the moment, unless it means we lose it.
That's the risk.
That's the risk. And you feel that's a substantial risk, and therefore we can't fool around with it?
I do.
Okay. Any other questions about highway?
Yeah, 56 salt, I know you've taken 10 out of that, but given what we know about the environmental consequences of salt, I would take even more and either use that as either reducing the amount of salt or working on better ways of applying the salt, because there are lots of different mechanisms that have shown to be very effective in applying the salt rather than just, the way we're doing it now. So I think if the only way we can get down to reducing the amount of salt we use is reducing the budget, I think we should do that. So take another 10 or 20,000 out of salt.
I don't know.
I'm willing to, and I've had these conversations with Paul, so he's not gonna.
I don't know, I traveled that Dorset Street, I'm awful happy to hit
I know, I'm
Shelburne
gonna-
line when it's a clean pavement.
What line is it on?
56.
Yeah. What occurred, by
I
the way,
just
to Paul's
can't.
test of,
It didn't
the
go
old-
well.
like it. He didn't like it.
go well.
It didn't go
We
well?
heard that at the budget
Yeah,
day.
no.
Okay.
And there was just an article about salt being up in price by over 10%. So
Yeah.
maybe
So
you
we
take
took it
5
from
off,
125
but
to
We've
115.
already
Yeah.
cut 10.
I'm kind of nervous about that one.
Yeah,
It's a
me
tough
too.
one. I mean,
don't
like,
wanna really.
the last 2 weeks, we get these little piddly 1-inch
Yeah, I
storms, a
know.
little ice, and you gotta send the guys out and
Yeah.
use
I'm
the
with
same
you in spirit,
amount,
Josh.
whether it snowed a foot or an inch.
With you in spirit.
I
Okay.
don't know.
Health and
yeah,
social,
Sorry.
okay, Colleen?
I want to leave that alone.
Health and social
And
services?
we're leaving the Irish Hill Pet Path, right?
yeah.
Yes,
All right, good.
it's an actual 16 outlay, but the way it's structured, the budget's structured, it's a total 80 obligation.
Can the other thing that I left now, but it applies to other things, is the whole gas and diesel about using, and, Mary and I have talked about the whole idea of idling controls on vehicles. And I think both for highway, fire, rescue, police, we really have to make a concerted effort to deal with efficiency and reduction in gas and diesel usage. However that happens across the board. I can't say cut X amount, but that's where we can make savings if we just made an effort to do so.
Yeah, my understanding, talking with the chief, is that the newer cruisers have some aspect of a hybrid operation, so that, for example, they don't necessarily need to be idling all the time to keep the computers and other systems up and running. So as we go through cruiser replacement, my understanding is that will start to happen by default.
Yeah. Good point. And by the way, those of you who are waiting on a later executive session, you will please indulge us. We have to spend this time, and I'm sorry you're having to sit and wait, that we really have no plan B here. We thank you, we appreciate your patience. Health and Social Services, I thank you for the bump up of Bob. And in both cases, I think that was way overdue.
Yeah, a very small increase to the health officer, especially given new responsibilities under state law. Have proposed a $3,000 decrease to the Social Services Committee. I've communicated with the chair of that.
Yeah, she's
and
aware.
Originally, I had proposed an $8,000 cut, and we're back up to a
Good.
$3,000 cut, and found that acceptable.
Okay, rescue?
Rescue, the whole budget is funded offline.
Yep.
Keep going then, right?
The question I had's been answered earlier. Anybody else, rescue? Cemeteries?
They do a heck of a job there for pretty slim.
Absolutely.
For a slim budget.
Yeah, absolutely. Parks and Rec? In this case, I questioned Davis Park, number 23, as to why we couldn't cut 1,500 out of that.
Possible.
Was there some special expenditure that took it up 75% from last year?
I'll have to,
4,000 to 7,000.
I will check and get back to you on that.
Might
Okay.
be
Next week.
some lighting improvements maybe, or something related to the tennis courts or the playing surface there.
That might have been a
possibly.
backboard replacement.
Yeah.
There's
I
some
think- no, I think
aspect that
was-
others,
yeah.
Which sounds like it could wait a year.
I'd have to talk to Betsy to see how, what the maintenance, what the condition is of those.
Yeah.
She's usually pretty frugal about doing capital improvements, so.
Yeah,
I wanna
absolutely,
hear
I
her
recognize that.
she's-
You want
they're
to,
very frugal.
yep. And in terms of beach house replacement, I think that has to be reduced as well by 2,500, I'd suggest. Others may want to see a larger decrease.
Yeah, I think we had a nice presentation. I think the board is thinks that this is a nice thing that we should do, but I don't think there's been a decision about moving ahead with doing a bleach house replacement, so I think we just zero that out until the board has made a decision and some projection of when that will happen. Because I'm not sure there's been a consensus. In the big picture on all of these things, residents want nice facilities, they want good facilities, they want good services. And we hope that the library will be a good facility, but it's, causing an increase. So we have to be realistic about what kind of time frame and what kind of, when these things get replaced. And since we don't have a time frame for it, we don't have any sense other than some visual designs. Yes, it's a nice thing to do, but is this the right year to start doing it?
Other comments about?
Well, we've been working on it, so it's not like we're starting.
Yeah.
Right? There's work that's pretty much been pro bono. So the thought is, how do we progress that work and get to a point where...
This is another one where the request was for 15,000, and in light of other discussions, this was proposed to be split over 2 fiscal years. Your suggestion is to
Just
not do
put
it at
off
all
a
right
year.
now.
I'm not so sure we shouldn't do a place mark here, though, Josh, of some amount. Just as incentive.
Okay, if you want to cut it again, that'd be fine too. I'm just getting to the sense of, okay, we have, all these improvements, need to be, because then we'll get into the, or then we have to build it.
Colleen, got a thought?
I think that the rec department does such an amazing job, and I know that Peggy and Betsy go out and volunteer their time, and they're out, striping lines on the fields and putting up signs and on, soccer days. And this has been a long project in the coming, or in happening, and I hate to say that I think we ought to wait a year. I just feel like these 2 years are really going to be tough.
You in favor of zeroing it out?
Well,
I think placeholding. I think a
Like
placeholder.
2,500?
Put 2,500 in.
How about 5,000?
5,000?
But what
Jamie?
are they going to do with 5,000?
I don't know what they're gonna do with
They're gonna do more than they
7,500.
would do with 2,500.
Yeah, I mean,
But if it's for design, how can you have I don't know. I mean, that was based on an estimate of how much the design costs would be.
Well, I think they
So-
would set priorities and fund what they could of those. I mean, it would ensure continuing development of the project, which
Yeah.
I think we're all agreed is a worthy project. I think our
I
comment
really would
is,
love to
it's
have
not this year's project, but we ought to encourage continuing development, if just incentive to the hours, the volunteer hours that are going into it.
Has there been any thought to increasing the fees for the beach?
That's a good point. I mean, certainly, we're less, Charlotte charges more than we do.
What do we charge? $5 for the sticker
No, I think it's
per
more
vehicle?
I think it's 15 for the first one and then 5 for the
Right.
next one, and seniors are 5.
Okay, we're gonna,
Thank
I
you.
mean, I'd like to see us stay at least at 5.
At
for
5?
that. Yeah.
5 is consensus, okay, Josh?
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
I want it too, so I
Anything else, Parks and Rec?
personally.
Library?
We've proposed a decrease in acquisition of
Wait a minute,
books
can we
and
go back? Oh, sorry, I'm at library, sorry. Never mind,
Okay.
keep going.
On library?
Yeah.
Okay. Lee?
So we've proposed, they took a bit of a break this year on acquisition to begin with, proposed an increase back up to their typical traditional amount that I understand libraries tend to try to keep statewide. I've proposed a decrease in that acquisition line for this year.
What line is it on the document?
That would be
33.
line 33.
But it doesn't look
And
like
then
you've,
You
It-
proposed
it looks like,
It was 45,
It was,
right?
oh,
Yeah, it's just not reflected on
yeah,
this sheet.
okay.
this isn't quite showing it yet. And then some other lesser proposed decreases as well in other lines, computers, other maintenance.
So I think I suggested that we cut it further. And their rationale is legitimate, and it's a certain amount comes out every single year. You have to stay current, and this is how much they have to spend every year to stay on top of it. And it's the same thing like with paving. If you stop doing it, then trying to catch up ends up being more expensive. And obviously, everyone here knows how much I support the library. Hours and hours and hours spent on the steering committee, and so it kills me to say that I think we should cut it to 15,000.
To 35?
20.
Yeah, that seems too low to me.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, in the past, it's been down to 39, so cutting it down to 30, back down to 30, possibility.
The library made a really impressive presentation about how efficient they are as compared to other communities, I felt, given especially the number of people who use the library.
Are we content with 35?
Or 30.
30.
Fine with 35.
35, 30.
Going once,
Do I hear one?
We're
35.
flipping coins here.
I'll buy it for 35.
35.
So we're cutting it to 35.
I had a question as well on computer technology expense, which doubled. My questions had to do with how much of an influence is this, how much is the new building an influence on this?
Let's see if we can find Kevin's
And then there's
presentation.
Yeah, and I've-
building maintenance
I've-
expense, which,
I've
This is
proposed,
39, page
so
10.
I've proposed taking another 2,000 out of that computer technology line.
Well, that's, yeah, that's what I would have thought, yeah. That would be going from 4 to 6 rather than 4 to 8?
Sure.
Conceptually, I mean, I think in Kevin's thing, he had some figure, in the +3, -3% thing about changing the hours. And that's something I think can be considered. I mean, even just a 5-hour, a decrease in 5 hours over a week would come up with, I think that was the 3% decrease. And so that's something that can be considered as well. And it shouldn't really have that much of an effect on.
Okay, any other comment on the
just
library?
the building maintenance expense. I mean, it's gonna be a bigger building, so cleaning will be more expensive, but
Yes.
is it gonna be $10,000 more?
I propose this because I still have a little, I think this, in my mind, there's still a little soft spot about the new maintenance requirements of the new building. And I'm not so sure, Lee, I wouldn't ask you to focus in on that specifically. That at occupation of the new building, what are going to be differences from prior year budget? They're significant and substantial, we know that. And are we adequately prepared for them? You're going to heat and cool a larger space. You're going to have cleaning a larger space. We've talked about contracting building maintenance between the two. You're going to have follow-on maintenance items for sure. And my sense, Colleen, is that we could break that out and ask Lee to be sure we're okay there. And that was part of my thinking, to add some significant money in there, because I have a gut feeling we're going to need it.
Yeah, my understanding is that the cleaning line was based on an estimate that Kevin got from a contractor,
Yeah.
given that it's a larger building. The heating, we're hoping.
That's not necessarily the same contractor who's working here, though.
No, because Darwin and Kyle take care of this building, but
But we also have someone who contracts here, though, correct?
I don't think so.
No?
I think they do it
Okay.
all, but they can't do.
No, clearly.
The heating, it's a kind of it's a mixed bag at this point. Yes, it's a larger building, but we're installing a much more efficient system
I
that will
understand.
work for both buildings, so we don't really know where
No, I
that's going to
understand.
shake out.
But if you have the time, just scour it again, would you?
Glad to.
Because it shows up in 2 or 3 different budget categories, and at points I got confused myself. Anything else on library? So to your point, Colleen, we'll revisit that.
Okay.
Debt payments, which unfortunately we can't do anything about.
Can I get an explanation, though? I have a question. I failed to see this on our original budget that we got a couple of weeks ago. So there's the library town hall at, wait a minute, 165,000, and the town center project at 219,000. What is the difference between the two? Well, I'm looking at the wrong line. It's now higher. It's 259 and 205. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong column. Can
Yeah,
somebody explain that?
The library town hall, that's the newest bond. That's the $6.5 million bond for
Yep.
the library and town hall. So what's happening there is we borrowed $2 million to start with. So that's what's in this year's budget, the interest on that. In 1920, we'll start paying principal on that $2 million bond. So that's the anticipated payment. We'll be going to the bond bank in the spring for the balance of the project. So there'll be another interest or principal payment in the following year when we ramp up to the full bond amount, which will probably be $5.5 million, thanks to the fundraising that's been done for that instead of $6.5 million. The other project, the town center, that's this building. that was renovated back in 2000.
Okay, and we're still paying on that.
We're still paying on that.
Got it.
It's about 2 more years after this, it's about 3 years to go on that one, then that'll be paid off.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Peter. Any other questions? Intergovernmental transfers, I was disappointed at the double CTA increase. But
Can't do anything. Yeah.
any case, any questions, comments on that item or benefits, the following one? In miscellaneous, I think Lee and I at the same time proposed a reduction in Select Board discretionary expense from 5,000 to 3.
The other two.
Town committee support at 5,000, I think, is overly generous.
Okay. Well, the only thing I'd like to ask about that is I'd like a separate line for the ethics committee funding, separate, because that's, I think, where that would be fitting in. Because there's no other place, and that is a town committee, but I think that should be broken out into a separate line. So it's very specific for that committee. And just as an aside, before whatever the deadline is, to have a ballot item so we can create a special fund that the ethics budget can roll over from year to year if needed with a max.
I'm just not going to support that, Josh. We don't allocate legal monies to any commission, board, or committee.
But we
I
had
don't
this.
think we should start with one.
I do, and I think that's what that's.
Good, we agree to
that-
disagree.
Well, I
Yep.
think I'd like I think when we had that.
Legal fees?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they made a request for $2,500
Right,
for-
but that's in the 60.
in the 60.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I think this would, if that's the case, fine. But I think when the last time when we discussed it with the chair, this was a separate item separate from the legal fees that was specifically directed and for the ethics committee, because if you want to cut the town committee support and other committees, make requests and there's no money left when the ethics committee needs the funds, what are you going to do? I think it needs to be a separate line item for that
Isn't
committee.
this-
Why
Isn't
would
this
one
for
committee be a
conferences and
separate
stuff?
line item
Because
from
it's
all boards, committees, and commissions?
because as we had this discussion before, the ethics committee is a completely different entity
Okay.
than all of the other committees.
Okay, I can't support that. Josh, any other comments? My
Well, you
assumption
can't
is-
support
my
it. I'd
assu-
like other people's.
I'm just going to ask if you'll
Okay,
give me a
thank
minute.
you.
My assumption is, as Jamie said, that they have access to the 60,000. So there
And
doesn't
if
be
they-
any.
and if the
They come before
60,000
the
is
select
gone?
board.
Yeah, I mean,
Excuse me?
we've acknowledged to the chair of the committee that we support that allocation, right, at least the hypothetical allocation, and he sort of seemed to consent to that, so
Okay,
I didn't
yeah.
think
And I
we
would
needed to
have
take
thought
it
it
to,
I mean, I'm okay with that if there is an agreement that even if that 60, that 2,500 is going to be available no matter what.
We just set it aside in the
Yeah,
legal
That's
legal
fine.
pot.
Okay, as long as
Okay.
it's clarified, then.
Thought
Okay.
we agreed to reduce the legal pot to 50?
50.
I'm sorry, I'm still using 60, 50.
And the town, I wouldn't have thought it would have come out of town committee support
That-
anyway.
I agree.
That's not.
Yeah, I think that's conferences.
And conferences, and I agree. I still think that's overfunded.
Okay, are you
That's fine.
okay with the
I'm
distinction?
okay with that, as long as there is that clarity,
Okay.
I'm fine with.
All right, and we're to return to town committee support, which I propose we drop 2,000 out of.
Actually
I-
suggested we go down to 2,000. That's still an increase above the 1,500 that they got the previous year.
So you'd funded at 2,000? Any ideas?
I'm
Any other-
lost. What line are we on?
23,
This
page
is-
11, 23.
23,
Thank
last
you.
page.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't see why it has to be 5,000. Can't it be 1,500?
Yeah, why can't we
15.
level fund it?
Colleen says
What-
15.
Yeah, let's do 15.
Do we have an idea of how much we've spent on so far? I mean, what the requests have been? I mean, I'm trying to remember what the requests of the
I
committees
think
have been.
the 5,000 came from, I think a couple of committees did specifically request
That's what,
funds for
that's what I thought.
conferences and
There
things.
there were more
Conferences.
requests this year, and that's why it was increased.
It can probably be reduced some. I think we try to, because we never know. I mean, as you go through a year, a committee may decide to go to a conference or something you hadn't budgeted for, but
Yeah.
we can take a look at that and, try to have some contingency there, but hopefully less than the 5,000.
All right, the guidance is 1,500, okay?
And then I had a question about 27 and 28. And again, like, these are absolutely important, and especially 28, the capital improvements. And with the idea of looking towards the future and not having to make up for lost time and the additional cost of delayed maintenance and deferred maintenance. But I think putting 30,000 between those two lines this year is just, it's a little heavy. And so I just suggested placing just a placeholder and getting through these next 2 years.
Well, that may be sort of, I don't know. I think we make money through energy efficiency improvements rather than spend. I mean, there's something that is, I'm not sure we're really saving by decreasing that, because any increase in energy efficiency is a long-term gain, and that to me is different. It's in the same thing of deferred maintenance. I think we get a payback on energy efficiency rather than a decrease in funds. So I think that's an important thing to keep pushing at.
I think long-term, you're absolutely right. But it could take 20, 25 years to see the savings back. Like even the savings from the energy efficient changes that we made to the library design, it could take 20 years to see the savings. But right now, these next 2 years are going to be so tough. And what we're asking every department to do is rough for them. And putting such a huge amount in the hope that we're going to see savings in 10 years is harsh.
Yeah.
And you also remember that every year they come out with new technology that makes energy efficiency even more efficient.
Do we have specific projects for that, Tim?
Well,
Identified?
my
or is
thought was several-fold, one of which was to, do walkthroughs with the Efficiency Vermont of all these buildings. For example, I worked with one commercial landowner in Manchester doing a complete retrofit of the lighting system for his restaurant. Cost him $500 out of pocket because of the dramatic rebates. He saved that $500 in year one. So some of them do, in fact, take a long time if you're replacing furnaces and heavy-duty HVAC. But sometimes with lighting, it starts to pay back almost immediately. I don't know if 10,000 is the right number. My
I would
thought in
recommend
proposing
that
it was
we-
some amount to help
Yeah.
us launch
I
that.
recommend that we drop
And maybe
37 to
re-spend less.
5,000 and halve 38.
Wait, wait,
It
where are
pains me to have 38, but
Where are you?
I'm at
28.
page
Maybe
11,
27 and
miscellaneous.
28.
27 and 28.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
So-
27 and 28.
Yeah.
So cutting energy efficiency to 5,000, is that correct?
Right, and capital improvements by half.
To
Yeah.
10.
I mean, I also think we should hold the tree conservation level. I don't see what taking $1,000 off does. Right?
I mean,
I
it has
thought
the
that was a
same-
compelling presentation from them
it's-
as well,
and-
in a
There will
environment where
be-
we have the emerald ash borer and a lot of threats to town trees. It seems
I
to
mean,
me that we should
that may be
overinvest.
something that we can't defer,
Right.
because
If you wait, then it's gone.
So we're
Yeah,
going to
right.
restore 26 and half both 27 and 28.
Right.
All agreed?
Okay with that.
Got it.
And that takes us to open space.
But open space is no longer as presented on our budget, I think, right? Is that right?
So
and
the,
That is right.
Third,
Well,
it's
that's
now
the-
at 35.
so
right?
the
It's
original,
now-
my
oh, no.
original proposal was 0, The new proposal is
It's 15,
15, so it's a
sorry.
cut
Thank you.
of 35 from where it has been in recent times.
What if we were to put this on the ballot as it's been in the past?
And that's
what I
what
Well-
I thought we had agreed to.
And in my proposal, I presumed we would do that. I wasn't trying to suggest that we integrate it or bake it back into the budget.
Yeah.
I was just looking at, if, assuming the voters vote for it, as they have dramatically in the past, if we're still looking at a target, I was kind of looking at it globally. If we look at it as an entirely separate line, we can kind of take it off the ballot, if you will, in a sense of we're looking at the town budget, the 5% target. If the voters want to approve whatever number you agree to put on there, that's certainly their prerogative.
Well, here's my sense of it. We're doing a budget, and we would have to assume any item put on the ballot singly, separately, is part of our budget. We can't do a budget and have an item on a ballot that could be approved that extends our budget. So we have to be conscious of the amount. And I think we're conscious of the amount before we make a decision about where it goes. And in this case, this is an amount in budget that's taking the place of some, I'm proposing an increase to 20, but it's taking $20,000 place from something else. I don't think it's enough to have a little annotation below the warrant article, jumping now to the question of ballot, that says if you pass this, your tax rate will increase by X. I think that's a cop-out. I think our obligation is to present to the town a budget that we approve for them to vote on that includes all known costs, of which this is one. So my sense of it is we ought to treat it as a budget item and as a next step, because we do have an item to deal with later tonight that pertains similarly, decide where it's placed. In that case, I would propose we go back to 20 and would be interested in what others of us think.
Well, in general, I think the basic concept for the open space or conservation fund is just that. And I put it in the same category as the tree issue. Is once things are gone, they're gone. They don't come back. It's not something you can defer with the hope that things will be okay. So maybe the original request for 50,000 might be a lot, but certainly as last year, 30,000 didn't seem to be an issue. But I think in a lot of ways, this is not something, this is the future of the town in a lot of ways.
I'd move that it be 25,000. I would be comfortable with that.
25. Colleen?
I just differ in my view. I mean, I think that it's going to pass no matter which way you shake it. And I think it's important that it's on a ballot item and people vote for it every year. It kind of reaffirms its importance. And it is different than the municipal running that we're talking about everywhere else. We're talking about like non-lethal equipment for the police department. And I see open space as different. It's an important priority for, I think, everybody living here, or at least, usually about 75%. And I like the fact that it's separate and that it's noticeable and that people, take it to heart when they vote for it. They literally vote for it and they say, we want this. And I don't think it's necessarily like sleight of hand to say, well, it's not in our budget, but we're going to sneak it in and it's going to increase your tax percentage by this amount. I think it's the fact that it's right there and everybody is saying, yes, we affirm, we want this. And I like that aspect. So I actually prefer it to be separate.
What amount would you propose, Colleen?
Well, they've consistently asked for 30,000 and sometimes more, and so I'm fine with what they asked for initially, or what has been in the budget in the past at 30,000, but it being a separate ballot item.
All right, let's deal with the amount. Jamie?
So, yeah, I mean, I would like to see us really double down here in some ways, and I'm very supportive of the 50K to do this. I
me
very
as
much
well.
see it as the smartest investment we can make.
I'd be happy
here
with that
in
too.
these decisions. And to your point, right? I mean, the real estate prices continue to escalate. The opportunities, we need to be ready to jump on these when they come up. And we just saw a couple that, fortunately, we had an open space fund and we can activate it. But if it'll start to get depleted, and I just feel like we need to really up our game here and make sure that we have the funds to do what we need. I do think it needs to be in the budget. And the other thought I had, and it may be, I know we talked a little bit about this at Budget Day, is maybe it's a good time for us to think about a half penny on the tax rate, right? We're in an environment where everybody's concerned about, is it 5.9 or is it 6, right? I mean, and I'm not as worried about that personally, but especially if I'm supporting a 50K open space investment. But I wonder if now's the time for us to really jump in and think about it. We had done it in the past in 2000, 2001 era with a penny on the tax rate. Half penny, I'm not sure what that would generate, but it would be more than 50K.
Do you think this year or next year?
Half penny would be 85.
85.
You live with 40?
Which is
We'll
a
stick
lot.
with 50?
I'd agree with 50.
Remember, we're trying to get from 6.9, I mean, 5.
Yeah, I think that's too hefty. I think these
40?
two, yeah, I think these 2 years, we're asking every department to cut so much.
Right.
Yep. And there's
40?
$100,000 in
So
the
we can-
bank. It's
40?
not like they're broke.
All right.
I think it's too much.
What number do we want to use, gang? 35?
30.
40.
30, 40?
10.
Hold
If
on.
we're gonna play
Why
this
don't we
game,
let
fine,
some
10.
folks here in the room if they want to talk. I know we have some folks from the
Gail's here.
Natural Resources Committee here, and
I don't envy you sitting where you are. Over the years, we have often wanted more than we've ever asked for, and we usually got less than we asked for. This year, we asked for 50 because the suggestion had been made to put it in the capital fund as at 50. And speaking to what Colleen said, I think it really hits the point. In terms of the number that you feel that you can afford, we have some projects that are in discussion. I don't know what the price of those projects will be. We do leverage the money for other funds, as I've told you. I don't want to take the time tonight when we're doing this. But I think I would like to see the people be able to vote for it, particularly this year because there's such a challenge with the budget. And this is something that we can't afford to lose. And if people, so that would, I leave the number to you. I like the numbers you're coming up with. They sound a lot better than what we started with. And I appreciate how hard this is for you. And I don't know if that was helpful.
Thank you, Gail.
helpful.
35 or 40, gang?
40.
40. 40.
35. I'm still gonna go. I really think it's. I mean, look, you've got the fire chief like going through and trying
I'm going
to
to split the
decrease his
difference and
budget.
say 37.5.
No, really, I
I mean, this
agree-
is
I would
different,
agree
right?
with
This is not
Colleen
an
on this.
operating department.
I
This is-
understand
I
that.
understand that,
But so do we
Everybody's
have,
got to take the hit, sorry.
yeah, so do we have reserve, so do we have opportunities for reserves in other places? And there are some safety valves here. There is a possibility down the road. In September, we could have a special town meeting to address a momentous, magical occasion of a thing that we simply could not fail to join and fund. That's not an opportunity that a department has.
Right.
There are some distinctions. I don't think it's a question of how the town votes for it. They're going to vote for it one way or another, either in budget or as a separate article. So I don't think that's the issue. The issue, again, is how much can we afford this year in a budget? You've heard us spend a lot of time tonight cutting, including our own stipends. And I don't think 50 is doable. I think 35 is a more reasonable figure, and we'll,
Done.
Fine,
Done.
I'll go with 35.
Support.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
Mr. Chairman, this
By
may-
the way, the issue, I'm sorry, the question of fees and additional revenues is a very live question that you haven't heard as much publicly, but we're really starting to spend a bunch of time on that. You heard the discussion from the comprehensive plan, which introduced it for one area. But we are to the point where, and I just wrote something about that in the report for the town meeting, where we must, the intensifying pressure on property tax is such that we simply must absolutely search out alternative revenue sources. And we could establish a means of permanently funding this outside of budget, which, as you know, have long felt we should be doing. I mean, I think that addresses the nature of the fund. And so you have a pledge, I think, speaking for all of us, that between now and next year's budget, we will I think, make some progress so that we're not necessarily treating this item in particular the way it's been treated and the way we're treating it now.
Mr. Chairman, in view of the hour, I think we're done with the budget review. At least I hope we are. We have 2 more items before we get to executive session. People have been waiting for quite a while. I would move that we drop items 11 and 12 and postpone them to our next meeting, and then move into executive session. Let's keep in mind, we have people here who've worked all day. There's individuals here who fought a fire all day. We need to move on.
Number 12 is really quick.
Yeah, do you want to quickly?
Yeah, why don't we
All I
do
want to
Yeah,
say.
I agree with
is-
11, Mary, because we were anticipating delaying that anyway. Yeah.
We'll just table that for now.
Yeah.
All I'd like to do is make a motion, since the town manager shouldn't have to approve his own funds for his own party. I think that I would like to make a motion that the funds up to $300 be available to.
Second, any discussion?
And with your consent, I will, on behalf of the select board, invite other municipal officials to this.
I think that's a great idea. Any discussion? Hearing none, those favoring? Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much, Josh. We now will enter executive session pursuant to 1 Vermont statutes annotated 313 to consider the negotiating or securing of real estate purchase or lease options, for which there are 2 motions.
I move to find that premature public knowledge regarding the negotiating or securing of real estate purchase or lease options would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Those favoring, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
I further move to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 VSA Section 313 to discuss the negotiating or securing of real estate purchase or lease options, and to invite the finance director, town manager, fire chiefs, rescue chiefs, Andrew Martin, David White, and Joe Wythe into the executive session with us.
Second.
Any discussion? Those approving the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. 15, 20 minutes, I would guess.
So moved.
So moved by
Second.
Jamie, seconded by Josh. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. We have no statement to make at this time.
Move to adjourn.
Moved by Colleen,
Second.
seconded by Jamie. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom.